All right, well, good morning, everybody. Like you said, my name is Kristina. My name is Kristina Motley. I am a senior environmental specialist with Maryland Environmental Service, and I work on Poplar Island, and I do pretty much all things outreach. So has anybody been to Poplar Island before? Raise your hands, either virtually or in person.
Around it, forever fishing,
Ah,
but it's not on.
Yeah. yeah, we have a lot of people who have like grown up or in the area, so they've seen it like before and after and during, so it's really cool to have that community there. So Poplar Island itself is it's a huge project. It's an international model of beneficial use, and it is funded by two main partners. So the two main partners we have are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They fund 75% of the project. And then we have the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Port Administration, otherwise known as the Port of Baltimore, who funds the remaining 25% of the project itself. So we have a lot of other project partners. There's just very much a island that has a lot of hands, a lot of great research, a lot of great organizations working on it. And I'll go over them as we go along the presentation, and then I'll shout them out at the end as well. But when we talk about Poplar Island, we actually like to go back in time a little bit to the year 1847. And the reason why we like to go to the 1800s is because that's when they first did the land survey on the island, where they measured the area of the land. And at that time, they found that Poplar Island was about 1,140 acres in size. It was a fairly large island. During the late 1800s, early 1900s, it housed a town called Valiant. This is a Remembrance map that was actually made by elementary schoolers in Tillman Elementary School. And so the town is called Valiant. At the time, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it housed about 100 individuals. There was about 10 farms. There was a schoolhouse / church. There was a general store. There was a post office, so fairly thriving town. However, they also had a sawmill there, which is something that we kind of attribute towards something that they were experiencing at this time. So during this time, the town of Valiant was very much experiencing the effects of erosion, where they were, at the time, it was estimated that they were losing about 15 to 20 feet of land per year. So the water was pretty much coming up to their doorsteps. So by the 1920s, all the permanent residents on Poplar Island unfortunately had to move off the island. And then as the years went on, the island went through a couple of different owners. At one point, it was owned by Campbell Soup. It was owned by the Smithsonian. One of the most famous owners was the Democratic National Party in the mid-1900s, and we had a couple of very big names that would be visiting there. We had Franklin Delano Roosevelt, if you'd like to visit the islands during that time because it was a hunting retreat, as well as President Truman. But the island was very much continuing to see this rapid rate of erosion. So that big island split into these 4 smaller islands, and it continued to erode away as the years went on until we go to the year 1993. So prior to 1993, the last owners of the island were a group of lawyers, and they owned all 6 of these islands with the knowledge that they would probably be completely eroded away within their lifetime. So we come in at 1993, and they conduct another land survey, and they found that the island had shrunk to just 4 tiny remnant islands. You see 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 on the north end. And those remnant islands were less than 5 acres in size. So if you compare that to our original 1847 footprint, Poplar Island lost over 99% of its land mass in a fairly short period of time. However, before I do that, so when they did the land survey at this time, they estimated that by the year 2000, the entirety of Poplar Island would be eroded away. However, we're well past the year 2000, and the island now looks like this. So it's a little bit bigger than completely disappeared into the bay. So we were able to find a solution. And the solution actually comes from one of Maryland's most important cities, the Port of Baltimore. So the Port of Baltimore is a huge economic drive, not only for the state of Maryland, but for the nation as a whole. And the reason is because of the port. We are the most inland port in the eastern United States. And that means that we are actually 150 miles more inland. That means that's 150 miles these big corporations don't have to worry about land travel. We're the closest port to the Midwest. So we're very appealing to a lot of different corporations. And so just a little bit of a snapshot of the economics of the Port of Baltimore. We have over 37,000 direct, induced, and indirect jobs, over 100,000 related jobs to the port in Maryland. Total about 140 jobs that are related to the port activities, 3.3 billion in wages and salaries annually, 395 million in state and local tax revenues annually. The Port of Baltimore, we're #1 in the nation for the imports of small cars and trucks. We call them ro-ros because they roll on and roll off the barges. We're also #1 in the import of sugar and gypsum. If you've ever been to the harbor area, you might have noticed the Domino Sugar Factory that's there. We're #2 in the export of coal. Can't be #1 in everything, so you know, we have to live with that. Baltimore ranks 9th in foreign cargo value. The 2022, we've had over 10 million tons of cargoes that pass through the port, and actually that's the 5th consecutive year that we've had over 10 million tons. And then we're 11th in the foreign cargo tonnage. So we're a huge economic drive. So we want to make sure we keep the Port of Baltimore open. And that can give us a little bit of a challenge because in order to get to the Port of Baltimore, they have all these big barges need to go through the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay is a fairly shallow body of water. So does anybody know how deep on average Chesapeake Bay is?
25 feet?
A little bit lower.
Lower?
Yes.
Lower?
Lower. A little bit.
23.
Lower.
20.
Higher. 21. We always get there. So it's not a nice number. It's like 20 would be nice, but no. So 21 feet. Now these big cargo ships that we see coming in and out of the Port of Baltimore, they need about 50 feet of draft or 50 feet of water in order to go through. So 21 feet and 50 feet don't really meet up very well. So we need to do a process called dredging, where we dredge up the bottom of the bay, create these shipping channels to the 50 feet depth so that these big, large cargo ships can come into the Port of Baltimore, keep it open, get all the good revenue that we have. However, that is not a one and done type thing. Just naturally sedimentation occurs, and those channels will accumulate the sediment and become more shallow as the years go on. So we need to do a process called dredging. So we have 5 million cubic yards that we need to take out of those shipping channels every year. And that poses another problem, which where are we going to put all that material? In Maryland, we don't do the process called open placement that a lot of other states, countries, and all around the world, they do. That is pretty much just taking the dredge material out of the bottom of those shipping channels, placing it somewhere else in the water. We don't do that because there's this idea that it may be a little bit detrimental to marine wildlife, but the main reason is that there really isn't a good place to put it in the bay. So we need to find another solution, and those solutions are dredged material containment facilities, and we have 3 active ones currently. So if we look at the first one that we had, that is Hart Miller Island. It's up north, it's actually by the Key Bridge, and it was pretty much considered a containment facility, a containment area, where the idea is just that we're going to put the sediment here, and it's just going to contain it. And there wasn't really much thought of afterwards. We're still working out there. It received its last bit of dredge material in 2009, and it is actually a state park now. There is a DNR facility out there. If you have a boat, you can boat up there, dock your boat on the edge of the beach that is up there in the north area, and you can go onto the beach area. There's a hard surface trail. They do 5Ks around it. So it's a very cool island just to look at and see if you are in the area and can make it there. But however, just like I said, it was filled to capacity in 2009. So they needed to find another spot for that. And so we go down to Poplar Island. So Poplar Island, we started construction in 1998, and we've been continuing on since then. We received our first bit of dredge material in 2001, but we only get material from what we call the approach channels. So there's an imaginary line at the end of the Patapsco River called the North Point Rock Point Line. Anywhere there below is material that we get. So we had that for a couple of reasons. One, because there's this idea that the harbor material can be a little bit more industrialized and kind of don't really want that. But the main reason is just location, location, location. It is a lot longer to bring material, a lot more money to bring material from the harbor area to Poplar than it is just to move it somewhere closer to there. And speaking of the areas closer to there, we have 2 dredge material containment facilities in the Baltimore area. One is Masonville Cove, and it is They're using it, the material, for what we call innovative reuse, whereas Poplars is for restoration. So with Masonville, they're going to fill in this area with the dredged material, and they're going to create more parking for those railroads of roll on, roll off. We have done a mitigation area that is next to Masonville Cove, the Masonville Cove Urban Wildlife Refuge. It has a living classroom facility up there. It is a very cool area. It's the only urban wildlife area in the Baltimore city limits, which is very exciting. We have Captain Trash Wheel that's hanging out there, as well as a lot of great animals. We have a live eagle cam out there with some eagles that have, I think we've confirmed 3 chicks that have been hatched there, so that's really exciting. And it's just a really great place. It's open to the public, so it's a great place to visit if you're up in the area. We also have Cox Creek, which you currently cannot visit because it's under construction because we just expanded it. And Cox Creek is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be more of an innovative reuse site, and it's going to be kind of more of a rolling site where all the material that goes into Cox Creek is going to be used for things like landfill caps, construction fill, and to create construction materials. We actually have bricks that we have constructed that are made with the dredged material that we're very excited about. But that also has a mitigated wetland that's next to it. You can see it here. This is the Swan Creek wetland area, and that has a lot of great wildlife in it too. And every now and then we do some great stuff there. They have an open house once a year that's really cool. But currently, again, it's under construction because we're just expanding it to create more room, and it's not open at this time.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So when you say construction, they drill down into the ground, put some kind of like brick walls up? Or
So
Can you repeat his question so people understand?
yeah. So he asked if when we start construction, do we put anything into the bottom of the bay, like brick walls or anything? We do not. We actually, so when we're construction, especially with Poplar Island and with the other sites as well, we do the perimeter first. So we do the perimeter of the island first, and we create it out of a special type of material called armor stone. So this armor stone is granite, and it is very similar to riprap, if you know what riprap is, the stone that kind of is on the edge of the of land to protect it. It differs from riprap in a couple of ways. Riprap only usually is up to 150 pounds, whereas this armor stone ranges from 200 to 4,000 pounds, depending on where it's placed. And this armor stone is very specifically cut, very specifically placed, and very specifically quality checked. It was one guy's job to look at every single one of those stones to make sure they meet our quality standards. It's been estimated that how we place these stones, armor stone, on the perimeter of these islands and then the dredged material containment facilities, they will last 150 years before they even start seeing any effects of erosion, which is what we want to happen, because we don't want what happened to Poplar Island in the past to happen in the future. So once we have the armor stone, what we do is we build what we call a tow dike, which is the line of stones there, into the bay, and that just helps buffer the undercut of the current. It's not really good to place all this material just on the bottom of the bay without that tow dike, because then everything will just wash away. So what we do is we layer this geotextile fabric, and then we layer it with stones and sands, and we just layer it up until we build the perimeter of the island. And we build it out until we continue to build the entire perimeter of the island out. So once everything is built out, we're able to start receiving the dredged material. So like the video said, we get the material from what we call a clamshell bucket. It looks exactly how it sounds. It's a huge clamshell looking bucket that's probably about as tall as this room is. And it goes to the bottom of the bay, scoops out the dredged material, and places them in a flat bottom boat called a scow. Those scows can hold about 8,000 cubic yards of dredged material. After those scows are filled up, it is then tugged over to wherever it needs to go on the island. And then it is attached to what we call an unloader. So I like to compare this process to chocolate milk. If you have a glass and you put some chocolate syrup in it, it's really hard to slurp up that syrup. It is useful.
God bless.
Sneeze too.
I know, I'm a serial sneezer. That was only 6. That is actually on the low end. So, you know. So I compare it to chocolate milk because if you put the chocolate in the glass and you try to slurp it up through the straw, it's really hard to do. You have to add in that milk, mix it up a bit, and before you're able to, drink the milk. Same kind of process here. I wouldn't drink it, but we mix the dredge material with water to create what we call a slurry. About 90% water, 10% dredge material. And after that is all mixed up, we then hydraulically pump it to whichever area it needs to go onto the island. Yes?
Isn't there part of that process where you clean it of any contaminants?
No. So,
Wait,
huh?
repeat the question.
Sorry? So we were asked if there's any part of that process where we clean it of any contaminants. We do not. So the dredge material is tested once every 3 years. We have set standards that are determined by the Maryland Department for the Environment, and it tests for things like contaminants, heavy metals, stuff like that. To date, we have never had anything exceed those standards, and that is including the material that we get on Poplar Island with the approach channels, as well as material in the harbor area as well. So the reason why that is because we're getting actually fairly new material. The sediment that accumulates on the bottom of those channels it's just new sediment that just accumulates throughout the years. And we're a lot better with environmental stuff than we were in the past. So we're not getting any of the gunk from, decades ago where things weren't as well regulated as they are now. So, but we do test it, and it is safe for what we're using it for. So this is being used for habitat restoration. Yes.
So how deep is it?
How deep is the dredge material?
The wall, or whatever you.
So I'll go into that a little bit later, but whether this is right here, we put it on the bottom of the bay. Some of our cells are only about +8 feet in elevation. And then in our wetlands, it can be a little bit variable depending on, where the water level is. And then this cell is one of our upland cells, which will ultimately be +25 feet in elevation.
So 25 feet above the water?
It is +25 above the mean low water level. So it's the average of the low water.
What about below the water level? How far down is it?
To the bottom of the bay.
Which is.
It depends on where we're at. Some areas of the island, it can be about, I want to say like 12 feet. There's certain areas of the island where we borrowed the sand that we used for constructing the perimeter of the island. And so we call those sand borrow areas. So there's areas within the perimeter that we took out the sand to create the perimeter of the island. And then we're going to fill that back into dredge material. So that can be a little bit deeper. So it just depends on where you're at. The area around Poplar Island is fairly shallow. It's usually about 6 feet on the east side and about 12 feet on the north. So after we get in all that dredge material from the slurry, we don't want that water anymore. So like I said, it was 90% water, 10% dredge material. Don't want that water anymore, so we do a process called crust management, where we will release that water back out into the bay, dry it out until it looks like this. So we want to dry it out. That helps us 2 ways. One, when you dry it out, it helps compact the soil, makes it easier for us to work with it. And then also the more water we take out of that material, the more dredge material we can then put on, which brings us to our goals. So we have 3 main goals of the project that we want to make sure we're hitting at any point during the construction process. And the first one of those goals is to optimize placing capacity for that dredge material. This island would not even exist without the need to beneficially use that dredge material. So we want to make sure we're putting as much dredge material on the island as we can. And again, the drying out process helps a lot. What will also help is that when we are drying out the cell, you can see the picture here, we do trenches. We dig trenches that helps percolate the water out so that we can release as much water as we can and then add more dredge material on. So Poplar Island has a capacity of 68 million cubic yards. We get about 2 million cubic yards every year. And that means we have about 30 plus years of capacity. We're currently at about 40 million cubic yards. So we have about 28 million to go. We're slated to receive our last bit of dredge material in around the 2030s. So that brings us to our next goal is now that we have the dredge material on the island, now that we have it all filled up where the areas that are all filled up, we then want to start restoring habitat. And the habitat that we want to restore is this remote island habitat. The story of Poplar Island and it eroding away, unfortunately, it's not specific to Poplar Island. It's been estimated that in our known history, we've lost over 400 islands in the bay, and every year we lose about 260 acres of wetland habitat. So this is very important habitat that is very much on the decline. And the reason why it's so important is because of the Atlantic Flyway. So if you look at this map, you can see the Atlantic Flyway. We have a lot of different flyways in the United States. The Atlantic Flyway is the one that goes through where we're at. If you look at where Poplar Island and where Maryland is, we're pretty much right smack dab in the middle of that flyway. And so a lot of our animals, a lot of our migratory birds and our migratory bugs like our butterflies will use these remote islands as a stopover point. So just like how we go on a road trip and we have to stop to rest and refuel, our animals need to do the same thing. So they'll look at these remote islands because they're separated from the mainland, which means they're separated from a lot of the mainland predators to rest, refuel safely, or even as their final destination. We have a couple of our migratory birds that we'll see pretty much sometimes on the island. We have a long-tailed duck that we have a lot of this time of year. If we get an eruption year where the snowy owls make it down this far, we're usually one of the first to get the snowy owls on in Maryland, which is really fun. We also get snow buntings in the wintertime. They're toasted marshmallow-like birds, they're really cool. We have windmills in the spring and the fall that will migrate through. We have pretty cool piping plovers. We had this guy visit us, his name is Little Cooper. And then we have our tundra swans. So a lot of our animals will come to Poplar Island again as during their migratory journey. But in order to make a habitat for them, we need to start constructing the habitat. So everything on the island has been very meticulously engineered and very meticulously made to attract certain what we call target species. So what we do is we get our pontoon excavator and we dig out channels into our wetlands. And then we build what we call a tidal inlet. With this one, we use box culverts. And then we allow the tide to go in and out of the cell. So we dried out that cell so that we can make the habitat features, and then we want to fill it back up because we're going to create wetlands. It's not really helpful for us to have dried out wetland cells. So after we're done with all of that, the cells, we are then ready for planting. And so every single one of our cells, every single one of our areas on the island, every single plant that you'll see there is hand planted within our cells. And so in each cell that's lowest, I believe, is just shy of 200,000 individually planted plant plugs. Our largest is over 500,000 individually planted plant plugs. And so we usually, sometimes we'll contract that work out, but in the past we've worked with organizations like the National Aquarium who would get volunteers up and help us plant our wetland cells. So when the wetland is first planted, it kind of looks like this. You can see we have our channels that we have dug out. We have our tidal flow. It's a little bit of high tide. This day, you can see that we have areas of low marsh, what will be low marsh that are a little bit more inundated, areas of our high marsh that are a little bit more dry. And you can almost see a little bit of the stubble that is newly planted plants. So this is April of 2011, and this is our cell 1C. If we go to May, you can see it starts to grow in a little bit more, where you can see a little sprouts coming through, the beard is growing in a little bit, and you're starting to see things starting to fill up. Once we get to June, it's looking a little bit better. You can see it's greening up a little bit, it's growing very, very well. By July, it looks like a full marsh. So it grows very, very quickly. The plants grow really, really well, especially since that dredge material is from the bottom of the bay, has very great nutrient-rich soil that we're putting in there. Then we have August, filling in a little bit more, September, October, and November. It looks like it's been there for years. And so this is what this cell looks like today. So very green, very luscious, and we actually have trees there now, which is something that we weren't really expecting because we didn't plant those. But those are cottonwood trees, and they just volunteered themselves there. And we're like, you know what? You're planting there, you're a native tree, have at it. And we actually have a nesting bald eagle nest in one of those trees now, which is very exciting. We haven't seen any chicks yet, but Mama's been sitting on there for a while, so probably any day, hopefully we'll be seeing some young guys hanging out there. So when we first started constructing the island, we wanted to build it to the historic acreage, 1,140 acres. The reason for that is because we're not allowed in the state of Maryland to build something out of nothing. We can't just find a spot in the bay and build an island. We have to restore it from the historical footprint of the island. However, since the Port of Baltimore is constantly in need of those shipping channels to be dredged out, we were needing more space. So we were able to do a lot of sediment sampling around the island, and we're able to provide enough evidence to show that the island is actually much larger in its history prior to 1847. So we're able to add on a 575 acre expansion for a total of 1,715 acres, which is our final approved acreage, which is what we are at right now. So we have 3 types of habitat that we're restoring on the island. We have our uplands, which is 829 acres. That'll be consisting of forest, meadows, and shrub. It pretty much looks like this right now because, like I mentioned before, those uplands are where we're at the plus 25 feet in elevation, and it takes a lot longer to fill that up. Every year, we usually only, with all of our dredge material, and usually only adds about a foot or 2 of land to the cells. And we do that on purpose just because if we do any more, it'll be a lot harder, a lot longer to dry out. And that time can vary depending on what the weather's like that year. So if we have a fairly wet year, it'll take us a lot longer to dry out those cells. If it's a fairly dry year, that can be a little less. And so we are still in progress with our upland cells. We're planning on planting the first one, our test plot, where we're just testing out what will grow there in 2027. Then we have our wetlands, which will have about 776 acres of salt marsh habitat. And that's where a lot of our ecological importance comes from. You can see a lot of our wetlands there. We utilize that. And then we have our third habitat feature, which is our open water embayment area that we have with our expansion. And that is just a semi-protected aquatic habitat that we made in collaboration with NOAA to protect our aquatic wildlife there as well. We actually were able to put some rock reefs out there, and we actually just put oyster spat out there a couple months ago, which is very exciting. That's the embayment. So we have a lot of nesting birds on Poplar Island. These are a couple of the ones that we like to point out just because they're cool, and they're really important. So the top 2, we have our common tern, which is the top left, and then we have our least tern, which is the middle there. Those terns, the common tern is endangered in the state of Maryland, and the least tern is threatened in the state of Maryland. And Poplar Island has had the largest common and least tern colony in the Chesapeake Bay portion of Maryland for the last over 10 years. So we get over, I think last year we had just shy of 400 common tern chicks that we were able to confirm hatching on the island, and then over 400 least tern chicks. So we're very popular with them. We're very glad to be able to have habitat for them. In the top left, right, sorry, I don't know directions. We have bank swallows, which is a very cool type of swallow. They like to nest in sheer cliffs. We get a lot of sheer cliffs with our sand piles that we have to use for construction. They burrow holes in there, and we're the only place in Talbot County where they will nest. We also have our egret species, this is the snowy egret. We have created habitat very specifically for snowy egrets. As you remember, the cell I mentioned earlier where the trees are replanted with shrubs. And that is where we've had our egret rookery or egret heronry for the last couple of years. So we've had a couple hundred snowy and cattle egrets that'll be nesting there, as well as other birds like Glossy ibis and some of our smaller heron species like our little blue and tricolored. And then we're also very, very popular with the osprey when their season comes, which they'll be coming on Poplar Island any day now. And that is just, we were very excited to have them because they were one of the birds that were very much affected by DDT all those years ago, and they've definitely rebounded. So the state of Maryland itself is really cool with osprey because we have the highest density of osprey during the breeding season compared to anywhere else in the world. So we usually have about 10,000 osprey that'll hang out in this area during their breeding season. Only 100 of them hang out on Poplar Island or so. We usually have about, on average, around 20 nests that are active on the island where they're actively nesting and raising young. And our highest year, we were able to band about 50 chicks just hatching on Poplar Island, which is good, but we work with a guy with the Patuxent Research Refuge, Greg Kearns, and he oversees like 300 osprey nests. So even though it's cool for where we're at, he's like, well, on the Patapsco River, I have 300 of them. I'm like, well, we're not the Patapsco River. He's so cool. I always love when he comes out. He has a nice book out about banning osprey. And then we have our last bird in the corner there, that is black-necked stilt. We do get a lot of shorebird species on the island, which is something that you don't see in this area. You would have to go to the shore, the ocean shore for that. But this is a black-necked stilt. They're really cool birds, and we have, according to eBird, largest breeding, I want to say colony, largest breeding numbers of black-necked stilts in Maryland. We usually get a couple hundred birds, and then a couple hundred birds make babies. And so they have really blossomed on Poplar Island, which is very exciting. So that brings us to our third goal, is we're building this big, huge project, and we want to make sure we are causing no harm to the environment. We take this very, very seriously. So we do a lot of monitoring. So we do exterior water quality monitoring, where we have points around the island that we're testing the water quality once per month throughout the years of May through October. We use sediment monitoring, which is what this picture is showing. We do it once per year, where we take sediment samples around the island and we monitor them. We do SAV monitoring, which is surface aquatic vegetation, about 3 times a year, and Fish and Wildlife takes care of that. And we do benthic monitoring once every 3 years, where we look at the living things that are in the water. And then along with causing no harm to the environment, so when we are releasing that water back out to the bay from crust management to dry out the island, that water can be a little bit off kilter, just because since that sediment, I mentioned it before, comes from the bottom of the bay, it comes from a very anoxic, low oxygen environment that is not introduced to any sunlight. When we spew it out onto the island, it gets introduced to oxygen and sunlight for the first time. So just naturally, some levels can get a little off. So we have set standards that are set by the Maryland Department for the Environment. We have parameters with limits that they limit. If they don't meet those standards, we will not release that water out to the bay. So those parameters are things like turbidity, how turbid the water is, pH, the pH of the water, if it's acidic or basic, total suspended solids, TSS, or heavy metals. Fortunately, what helps us out is that if they don't meet any of these standards that have limits on them, pretty much the only thing we need to do is wait. Mother Nature is really good at leveling herself out, so if one of these levels isn't really meeting it, we'll just wait, and then Mother Nature will take care of it herself, and we will get those numbers to the correct area, and then we'll release them out. A lot of the times, it just depends on like the weather. For example, turbidity and TSS, if it's a very windy day, like we had these past couple of days, the wind, meaning the water will churn up the solids on the in the bottom, and that can cause it to be more turbid, so we just need to wait for a less windy day. With pH, rain will affect that a lot, so we'll either need to wait for another rain event or wait for the rain that has been placed in there to evaporate a bit up to change the pH. We also measure other parameters that don't have limits, but we still measure them just for research purposes and just to have a nice record of them. So we test for dissolved oxygen, salinity, conductivity, and temperature. So it's really hard to quantify the value of an ecosystem, but we do the best we can. So at this time, we have just shy of 400 acres of wetlands that have been restored. If you remember in the video, we were at like 200 something, so we're able to add a little bit more of acreage on there. We do bird censuses twice a month, where one of my coworkers, he goes out and counts every single bird that is on the island. So we've been able to identify over 250 bird species on the island, and that grows every year. So it's really good to see how, as we restore habitat, we're getting more birds utilizing this habitat. And with that, we have had at least 44 bird species nesting on site. So we have this habitat that bird species are nesting on, and a lot of them are bird species that won't nest anywhere else in the bay. So we have our endangered animals like the common and least terns, Just recently, these past couple of years, we're pretty much the only place that we have nesting northern shovelers, gadwalls. We had a blue-winged teal last year. And then we have our big nesters over the season. We have our osprey, our egrets, ibis, stuff like that. So we've become a very great area for rookeries and for the birds to raise their young in a nice, safe place. And then we also have a lot of terrapins that will hatch on the island. We usually get, the highest year we've had over 1,400 terrapin hatchlings that have hatched on the island. So we're a very good island in concerns with the animals and with the wetlands. Speaking of terrapins, so terrapins were kind of a little bit of a surprise for us. This island was very much built with the birds in mind. You know, a lot of our habitat features that we place in there are planted and construction with our target species being the birds. Everything else that comes onto the island is just gravy. So when we first started constructing the island, it was pretty quickly that we noticed that the diamondback terrapins that were in the area were really appreciating what we were doing. And seeing this opportunity, we decided to hit up Ohio University with Professor Willem Rosenberg, and they've been monitoring the terrapins for over 20 years. So they look for these tracks of the big mamas in the sand, they look for the nesting mama terrapins, and they will excavate the nest, count all the eggs, see how many eggs they'll have, put the eggs back in the nest, they'll mark them, and then they will monitor them throughout the season until they hatch out. Once they hatch out, they're very cute. They're about the size of a quarter. They're very adorable. And every single turtle that comes into their hands gets tagged in a certain way. These little guys are a little bit too tiny for these pit tags that you see here. These are passive integrated transponders. They work exactly like the microchips you'll see in your pets. So it's not a like GPS tracking thing. It's more of if that turtle gets captured again, they can scan it, get the number for it, look in their records, see what that turtle was, see the records of the turtle. The little guys are a little bit too tiny, so they get a little metal tag in their leg, and that's pretty much, they have a metal detector that they wave the turtle in front of, and if it, you know, the light turns on, they have a piece of metal in them, that means that turtle was hatched on Poplar Island. If they're big enough, then they'll get a pit tag. But we also saw another opportunity here, where like I showed in the slide before, a couple slides before, is that we get around 1,000 terrapins hatch every year. Our average is about 800 terrapins that hatch on the island every year. And the majority of them, they'll tag, they'll release that into the wild, and you know, maybe they'll capture them again. But a portion of them gets sent to a couple of different organizations. One of them is my organization, which is Maryland Environmental Service. One of them is the National Aquarium in Baltimore. We have 2 environmental education centers, one in Peachtree County, one in Anne Arundel County. And that's just year we started adding in the University of Maryland. Why it took us 20 years, but you know. We are all a part of the Terrapin Education and Research Partnership. We'll get a portion of the terrapins that hatch onto the island, and we will then distribute them to classrooms all over the state of Maryland. And we distribute them to those classrooms, and then the students will raise that terrapin for the school year, and then they will come back to Poplar Island in the spring to release their terrapin back in the marsh. So this is a great program, not only for the students, because they get an idea of the scientific research process while they're raising their terrapin, they're collecting data from Professor Rosenberg. They also get a nice appreciation of the natural and cultural history of the diamondback terrapins. These are our state reptiles. But they also, you know, get to help out with, you know, just to see the life cycle of the turtle itself. And the turtles themselves get a benefit for them as well. So when they first hatch out, the diamondback terrapins are about the size of a quarter. Very small, very bite-sized. You know, they're pretty much like chips. But when they're with the students, they don't have to worry about things like food, because they get fed. They don't have to worry about things like being in a safe environment, because they have very specific parameters that their tank has to be in. They don't have to worry about predators, unless you count small children as predators, which, and most importantly, they don't have to go through their winter hibernation. So their entire time they're with the student's care, the majority of their energy is spent towards eating and growing. So when they come back in the spring, these terrapins are about the size of a 3 to 5 year old terrapin, which is about this big. And so the idea is that makes them a little less bite-sized. But what we noticed is, as we've done this for a couple of these 20 years, is that the terrapins that we release into the cells from the Head Start program actually mature a couple years earlier than their wild counterparts. So in the wild diamondback terrapins, it takes them about 7 years until they reach maturity, until they're able to lay eggs. With our Head Start turtles, it takes them on average 5 years. So that's 2 extra years of egg laying for a previously imperiled population. Willem says not to quote him on this, but I'm doing it anyway. He thinks we have about a population of about 7,000 terrapins just around the Poplar Island. But it's really hard to figure, to get a good number on that, just because, anything in the water is hard to keep track of. So Poplar Island itself has become a great success. We have a lot of great research going on the island. We've seen a lot of great animals, a lot of great things going on the island. But like I said, the island has about 28 years-ish, 28 million cubic yards of dredged material that we have to place in there. We're planning on receiving our last bit of dredged material in 2030s. So that brings us with a new question of what happens next. All right, so that brings us to our Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island project. This video is actually a couple of years old. We're actually a little bit further along with construction for a couple of them. But we first like to focus on James Island, which is right there. You can see Poplar Island is right up here, right near St. Michael's, just along the way in the water. It's about 15 miles down south. So James Island is pretty much going to be like Poplar Island 2.0. It's going to be a portion of upland habitat, wetland habitat, and it's going to be made to restore this remote island habitat. We just had a new recommended plan placed out a couple of days ago that I slapped in here. So the upland dikes will be about 20 feet high. We have habitat design that we're working on. It'll be about 2,700, I know numbers, I know how to read, 2,072 acres, about 50% wetlands, 45% uplands, and it'll have about 90 to 95 million cubic yards of capacity. So it'll be much larger than Poplar Island, 68 million cubic yards. And we'll have the placement that will be open for placement for about 30 years. Then we have Barren Island, which is a little bit more farther south. And this island, like the video said, is not getting any material from the shipping channels, but is getting material from the Honda River channels, which is a lot smaller. It's a little bit more of a smaller project, but that started this past Monday. And so it's pretty much just wetlands. It'll be about 83 acres of wetland habitat, and they're just going to restore a little bit of habitat there. And this is just a couple of just things that are going there. It's going to be only open for 7 years, so it's a little bit of a smaller project, but it's very much a project that will have a lot of really great habitat benefits that we'll have. So very exciting for the future, very exciting to see how that goes along. So back to Poplar Island, we do offer tours. You guys have tours on April 11th and June 9th, I believe. Let me just make sure of that. June 9th and April 11th. So you guys can work with Chesapeake Forum to sign up for those. Very great programs. With our general tours, we offer them 9 to noon, most weekdays, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And we pretty much go, it's a half-hour boat ride to the island, 2-hour bus ride around the island where we stop at specific stops, talk about key things that we'll look at the island, and then a half-hour boat ride back. So it seems long, but it actually goes on pretty quick, and it's a very fun program. We're currently, you guys were able to be booked up pretty close. We're currently, just in general, just booked until June, so we are very popular, as it was. We also do a couple other programs. We do birding tours. We do about 8 of them every year. They're very, very popular. We open those up. We have a listserv that will go by where pre-registration on like our general tours where you can just call us up and we'll place you on. They opened up in January, like January 15th, and they were all booked up January 18th. So if you want to be on our distribution list, I have a sign-up sheet here that you guys are more than welcome to put on. And I try to open up more dates in the season. We'll see how it goes. It always depends on where the wind blows. But we try to get as many people out on the island for those birding trips as possible. They're a little bit longer than our general tours. They're 9 to 1:30, and it's a lot less than me talking. So we pretty much get them on the bus and then go and look for birds. And then we do have our children tours, our student tours. Mainly during our turtle release season, the entirety of our April and May is releasing turtles and doing some great school programs with that. But we also do school programs for any school, any organization, any summer camp that wants to come out there as well. So that's always really fun. And if you want to learn more about Poplar Island, we do have our website, poplarislandrestoration.com. We have a lot of great information there. If you want to get information on the tours, we have a link there. So it's a great resource to go to if you want to learn a little bit more about the island itself, because I only really scratched the surface. So I said I wanted to shout out our project team. So we have our two main project sponsors, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Port Administration. We have my organization, which is Maryland Environmental Service. We work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, USGS, NOAA, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Department of the Environment, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. We also work with other universities like Salisbury University and Ohio University. So this is very much a project with a lot of great research, a lot of great hands on the island. So I have my contact information here, but we usually have this time for, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there any research being done on these from a sea level rise standpoint and the sustainability of what you're building?
Yes, he asked if there is any research being done on the sea level rise and the sustainability of the island itself. That is a yes. That is being conducted by the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So within all of our wetland cells, our completed wetland cells, we have about 6 what we call SCT tables, depending on how large a cell is. So the SCT tables are surface elevation tables, where they measure the elevation of the sediment in our wetland cells by the millimeter. So they go out at least once a year, and they take the measurement of our wetland cells to see how they're doing. They look at the accretion, they look at the erosion of the island, and they compare it to surface elevation tables of what we call our reference sites, areas around the island that we reference for our marshes, as well as, SCTs in the area, and, this is these are things that are kind of worldwide. So there's SCT tables all around the world that we compare things to. So we do compare our SCT tables to current projected sea level rise, and currently we are keeping track. We are accumulating sediment, the same rate as sea level is projected to be rising. So we're pretty cool good with that in that regard. And we're even doing better than our reference marshes, which is nice. But we are keeping an eye on it. There's always new research coming up. So what really helps us out is that we have what we call an adaptive management plan. So if, research change, we're able to adapt going forward. So, if we made one cell and then we realized what we did is not really the best way to do things, we're able to evolve and do it better as we go along. And James and Barren Island will have that same type of adaptive management plan. So as new research comes in, as new technology gets introduced, as new research organizations get out there, we're able to change and adapt as things move along. Yes.
With the big channel, I understand how things fill in, and that's your sediment, but what keeps the channel?
That's just how they construct it. I would have to ask our engineers, what keeps the channel shape once it gets dug within the shipping channels. I unfortunately don't know that. So, yeah.
Last time we went out on a trip, it was in fall.
Mm-hmm.
What will be different here in the spring?
In the spring, it'll be different, especially since you're coming out in April and then you're coming out in June. So in April, we'll start seeing most of our the grass will start greening up. We'll start seeing the beginnings of our summer migrants. So hopefully there'll be some osprey hanging out there. We'll be seeing more of our spring migrants going through. We may have some of our winter migrants sticking around. But it'll be a cool weather day, hopefully. And we'll be able to see some of the stuff that's going on there. But in June, that's when our migratory birds really start getting into the swing of things. So we'll have our heron reeves will probably be a little bit more populated during that time. It's early June, so it'll take a little while we'll start seeing a lot more of our tern species coming back. Our osprey will definitely be back and on eggs during that time. So it's really cool with our birds.
So June is more for nesting?
June is a very popular time for the nesting birds. Yeah, it's one of my favorite times. I'm a bird person, so I'm like, June is my favorite time because I get to like squish little baby terns. So I say that, sounds bad, but we have USGS out there. They'll monitor all of our nesting bird species out there. And so they'll go into our hanneries and count the chicks, and then they will do a banding of our common and least tern chicks out there. So they'll grab the chicks, they'll band them, and then they'll release them out for a recite research project. And they have a lot of really cool technology going on. Apparently, I didn't know of this, but apparently this year they're looking at like infrared to like look at the tern chicks to like see where they're at in the areas that they're nesting. So like they look at the heat signatures. Apparently, I just learned of this like in passing with my coworker who we did a birding lecture a couple days ago, and I'm like, that's cool. So and they also do GPS transmitters on the birds, and we have a Modus tower system they're just radio transmitters that will ping any of the birds that we tag. So it's really cool research that they're doing out there.
So the GPS is on the tag?
It's on, yeah, they have like a little GPS backpack that they put on the terns.
Oh.
Yeah.
You said that it originally was free of predators, but obviously it's not gonna stay that way. I mean, you got raccoons, I'm sure you're gonna have predatory birds.
We have it's relatively predator free, especially when you compare it to the mainland. So we don't have raccoons.
You know,
We do not. No, we don't have raccoons. We don't have any like megafauna like that. We don't have any foxes. Every now and then, when the bay freezes over, a fox may come onto the island, but Fish and Wildlife works on relocating them off the island because they're very good at eating our little baby terns, and that's not what we want. We still have predators, like we have snakes on the island, we have predator birds on the island, but it's a lot less than what they would see on the mainland. And a lot less habitat stress because, we have pretty much the only humans on the island are us. And we have very strict SOPs, standard operating procedures, to make sure that we, give the animals space when they need it.
Will you plant any trees?
We will. That will be our upland cells. So we have our wetlands that we will plant with mainly our wetland grasses. We're a very Spartina dominant marsh. We usually have Spartina alterniflora is our low marsh grass, and then Spartina patens is our high marsh grass. Those names have changed. I forget those. It's like Sporobolus, and I'm like, and then we have a couple of cells with other wetland grasses, if you know the scientific names of like juncus and stuff like that. Our habitat islands, we plant with shrubs that we mainly high tide bush and groundsel tree. We'll plant, those are our two main ones, and those are very popular again with the egrets, and actually, surprisingly, the baccharis, which one is baccharis? I think it's a groundsel tree. During the fall, it gets really pretty white flowers on it, and the monarchs love it. So we have those volunteer species of cottonwoods that come up in a couple of cells. There is one cell, it's actually this cell right here. And then there's another cell over there that has had cottonwoods just volunteer themselves. In our first cell we had a small test plot where we planted trees there just to see what trees will grow. That wasn't really helpful to us because we planted it in sand and the dredge material is mainly silt and clay. So, but all of our upland cells will be planted with forests and shrubs, meadows like that. And we're going to start planting those, our test plot in 2027. So it's it'll take a little while for us to figure things out because it's the first, we're doing it for the first time. But with our test plot, we're going to test things like what species will grow well in the area. And the main thing one of the main things we're looking at is the age of the plant that we'll plant there, because trees take a lot longer to grow. So you can put little baby saplings in there. However, we're a little bit high up in elevation, so we'd have to worry about the wind. There's one of our other sites that we planted with really tiny baby saplings, and then a big windstorm came up and that ruined everything. However, if we get larger saplings, that takes a lot longer to grow, it costs more money. So we have to find a good balance for all those as we go along, as we start building up. But we have habitat subgroups that'll meet periodically to talk about the construction process of that stuff, which is really cool. Yeah.
Is there any research being done on what the potential impact of this being built on surrounding areas? So like, sand mines or erosion in those areas, does it slow that down?
Yeah, so part of our environmental impact statement before the island started was looking at the hydrology and the geomorphology of that. We built it in a way that's why the uplands are on the west side and the wetlands are on the east side, is because once the uplands grow up, once the trees get up, that's a really nice wind buffer. And that the mainland will probably see a lot of that. It'll affect mainly our neighboring islands most of all. Our neighboring islands themselves have definitely have some benefit with, having Poplar as a buffer. That's one of the reasons why the neighboring islands, Coaches and Jefferson, were able to, be as large as they are when we started construction, is because most of the wind and wave action comes from the west. And so it hit the Poplar Island first, and then it went to them. So there'll be a little bit of effect, benefit for them. And, having wetlands is just beneficial in general because it helps filtration and all that fun stuff. In concerns with, places like St. Michael's, it'll be hard to say because St. Michael's is pretty far away. It's really much local at this point, and it's hard to say what it will have. But just in general, it'll cause in this area a lot of more recreational benefits. Fishing is really good around the island, especially with the rockfish around our. They really do like the armor stone that we have around the area, so recreation is a big one, as well as jobs that we bring to the area. Most of the people working on the island, a good chunk of them are locals, and we try to bring people from the local area to come out to work on Poplar Island. So we want to make sure that is a good benefit as well.
Have you seen other turtle species like snappers or?
We've seen about every type of water turtle you would have in this area on the island. Snapping turtles are one of the more common ones. We're definitely a terrapin dominant area just because we are brackish water. Terrapins are the brackish water turtles. Most of the other turtles are more freshwater turtles, but we do see a couple of snapping turtles that'll be nesting every year. We've seen musk turtles, mud turtles, spotted turtles, painted turtles, red-eared slider ones. That was unfortunate. And then in the EIS, when they were looking at coaches, apparently they found a box turtle.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, well, okay. Which is, it wouldn't be that surprising because one, St. Michael's is like, the St. Michael's area, that whole peninsula there is like inundated with box turtles. Like we see every time we go into work during turtle season, I'm probably rescuing like 20 box turtles like every season. So, there's a lot of box turtles there. And what's really cool about box turtles is that when they're young, they're aquatic. So the little babies will be more aquatic than when they're adults and they get more land turtles. So maybe, we'll see. If there's a will, there's a way. It's one of those, if you build it, they'll come. Life finds a way, as Jurassic Park says. So very interesting. And we do have other reptiles on the island, mainly brown water snakes. And then we also have eastern king snakes, which is pretty cool because, you don't see a really big population of them around. King snakes, I like a lot. They're pretty cool and they're also pretty chill. But they're called king snakes because they're the highest, on the totem pole of snakes because one, they eat other snakes. And two, they're immune to snake venom, so they can eat the venomous snakes. We don't have any venomous snakes on the island. Mainly the water snakes, we have black rat snakes, king snakes, and then garter snakes every now and then. We had a green snake last year, which was pretty fun.
Do any of these snakes go after the bird eggs? That's what I go over, or they're just rodent eaters?
Not really. We have a very big population of mice on the island. And what's really, there a lot of like the king snakes and a lot of the water snakes, they will predate the terrapin nest.
Okay.
So we will see that, but it's not, not a really big detriment.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very, very
Yeah.
much.